Ambassador Sarah Chen walked through the gleaming corridors of Council Station Alpha with her usual calm smile. Her soft footsteps echoed quietly against the polished metal floors as alien beings of all shapes and sizes moved around her. Some had multiple arms, others floated in environmental suits filled with strange gases. A few looked almost human except for their blue skin or extra eyes. But they all treated Sarah with the same respectful nods and gentle greetings they had grown used to over the past 50 years. "Good morning, Ambassador Chen," called out Zixtal, a tall insect-like creature with 4 arms and compound eyes. His translator box turned his clicking sounds into perfectly clear English. "I hope you slept well." Sarah turned to face him, her brown eyes warm and friendly. "Very well, thank you, Zixtal. How are your younglings doing? I heard they just started their education cycles." The alien's antennae twitched with pleasure. Even after all these years, he still found it amazing how humans always remembered personal details about everyone they met. "They are doing wonderfully. My youngest just learned to count to 100 in 3 different languages. That's wonderful," Sarah said, and she genuinely meant it. "Please give them my regards." As Zixtal continued down the corridor, Sarah's smile remained perfectly in place. She had been Earth's primary ambassador to the Galactic Council for 8 years now. Before her, there had been Ambassador Johnson, and before him, Ambassador Patel. All humans who served in this role shared certain qualities. They were patient, kind, thoughtful, and never seemed to get angry no matter how difficult the situation became. The Galactic Council had been formed over 300 years ago when 5 different alien species met for the first time and decided that cooperation was better than war. Since then, 47 different species had joined the Council. Humans had been the 43rd species to join, arriving 50 years ago in simple ships with peaceful intentions. Sarah remembered reading the historical records when she first took this job. The first human ambassador, David Kim, had arrived at Council Station Alpha in a ship that was barely capable of faster-than-light travel. When asked about Earth's military capabilities, he had honestly stated that humans had no space-based weapons and that their planet had recently emerged from a series of global conflicts that had taught them the value of peace. The Council members had been impressed. Here was a species that had learned from its mistakes and chosen diplomacy over violence. They welcomed humans with open arms and quickly discovered that Earth's people had a natural talent for solving disputes between other species. Sarah entered the main council chamber, a massive circular room with seats arranged in concentric circles. The center contained a holographic display system that could show anything from star charts to live video feeds from across the galaxy. Today, the chamber was only half full. Many council members were dealing with local issues on their home worlds. She took her seat in the human section, a simple chair made of earth oak wood. Most other species preferred high-tech seating that could adjust to their specific physiological needs, but humans had always chosen simple, natural materials for their furniture. It was another thing that made them seem gentle and non-threatening to the other council members. "Attention, council members," announced the mechanical voice of the station's AI system. "Today's session will address the ongoing border dispute between the Zephyrian Republic and the Korthak Empire. Ambassador Chen of Earth has agreed to serve as mediator." Sarah stood up smoothly and walked to the center of the chamber. Around her, the various alien council members settled into their seats. She had mediated dozens of disputes over the years, and her success rate was impressive. Humans seemed to have a gift for finding solutions that worked for everyone involved. "Thank you, council members," Sarah began, her voice carrying clearly through the chamber's acoustic systems. "Before we begin, I want to acknowledge the serious nature of this dispute. Both the Zephyrian Republic and the Korthak Empire have legitimate concerns about their shared border regions." On cue, the holographic display activated, showing a 3-dimensional map of the disputed space. 7 star systems lay between the 2 powers, each containing valuable resources that both sides claimed. The Zephyrians argued that they had discovered these systems first. The Korthak Empire insisted that their ancient migration routes gave them prior claim. The Zephyrian representative, Admiral Kesevar, rose from his seat. He was tall and thin with pale blue skin and silver hair. His people were known for their advanced technology and proud military traditions. Ambassador Chen, we appreciate your willingness to mediate this matter. However, I must stress that these systems rightfully belong to the Zephyrian Republic. Our survey ships mapped these regions over 200 years ago. With respect, Admiral, interrupted General Thurok of the Korthak Empire, mapping does not equal ownership. My people have been using these systems as waypoints for over 500 years. Our ancient songs tell of the great journeys through these very stars. General Thurok was a massive creature, nearly 3 meters tall with thick gray skin and bone ridges covering his skull. The Korthak were known as fierce warriors who valued strength above all else. Despite their intimidating appearance, they had been peaceful members of the council for over a century. Sarah listened to both sides present their arguments. She asked clarifying questions and took careful notes on her tablet. Her expression remained neutral and thoughtful throughout the presentations. This was exactly the kind of work that humans had become famous for throughout the galaxy. Other council members watched the proceedings with interest, but little concern. They had seen this process many times before. A dispute would arise, emotions would run high, and then Ambassador Chen or one of her predecessors would find a creative solution that satisfied everyone. Humans had an almost magical ability to see past the surface of conflicts and identify underlying needs that could be addressed. As the morning session continued, Sarah began to notice certain details that concerned her. Admiral Kesevar spoke about the disputed systems as if the Zephyrian Republic had already decided to claim them by force if necessary. General Thurok made references to ancient rites of conquest that suggested the Korthak Empire was also prepared to use military action. During the lunch break, Sarah retreated to her private office in the human section of Council Station Alpha. The room was decorated with simple furniture and pictures of Earth landscapes. A small plant from her home planet sat on her desk, its green leaves providing a splash of natural color in the sterile environment of the space station. She activated her communication console and established a secure connection to Earth. The image of Director Harrison appeared on her screen. He was an older man with gray hair and kind eyes, serving as the head of Earth's diplomatic corps. "How are the negotiations going, Sarah?" he asked. "Both sides are being more aggressive than usual," she replied. "I'm getting the impression that they're not really interested in a diplomatic solution. They're going through the motions because the council expects it, but they've already made up their minds to fight." Director Harrison nodded thoughtfully. "That's concerning. The council has relied on peaceful resolution of disputes for centuries. If that system starts breaking down, it could lead to a broader conflict," Sarah finished. "Other species might decide that military action is more effective than diplomacy." "Keep working on them," Harrison said. "Use whatever tools you need. We can't let the peace that the council has maintained fall apart on our watch." "Understood, sir," Sarah replied. "I'll do everything I can." After ending the call, Sarah sat quietly in her office for several minutes. She looked at the plant on her desk and thought about Earth. Her home planet was beautiful and peaceful, covered in blue oceans and green continents. The people of Earth had learned to live in harmony with each other and with their environment. It was this peaceful nature that had made humans such valuable members of the Galactic Council. But as she prepared for the afternoon session, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental was changing. The other council members had grown comfortable with the idea that disputes could always be resolved through discussion and compromise. They had forgotten that not all species shared humanity's commitment to peace. The afternoon session began with both sides presenting more detailed arguments for their positions. Admiral Kesevar brought up historical precedents from Zephyrian law. General Thurok quoted ancient Korthak traditions about territorial rights. Neither side seemed willing to consider the other's point of view. Sarah tried several different approaches to find common ground. She suggested resource-sharing agreements, joint development projects, and rotating administrative control. Both sides rejected every proposal she made. As the hours passed, the discussion became more heated. Admiral Kessevar began making thinly veiled threats about the Zephyrian military's capability to enforce their claims. General Thurok responded with reminders of the Korthak Empire's proud warrior traditions. Other council members began shifting, uncomfortably in their seats. This was not how these sessions usually went. Normally, Ambassador Chen would have found some clever solution by now that made everyone happy. Sarah maintained her calm demeanor throughout the session, but inside she was growing concerned. She had handled difficult negotiations before, but she had never encountered two sides that seemed so determined to avoid a peaceful solution. As the day's session ended, both the Zephyrian Admiral and the Korthak General made statements that chilled Sarah to the bone. The Zephyrian Republic will not allow this matter to drag on indefinitely, Admiral Kessevar declared. We have responsibilities to our people that may require decisive action. General Thurok stood up slowly, his massive frame casting a shadow across the chamber. The Korthak Empire has always honored the Council's processes, but there are limits to our patience. Some things are worth fighting for. As the Council members filed out of the chamber, Sarah remained standing in the center, looking up at the now empty seats. For 50 years, humans had served as peacekeepers and mediators for the galaxy. They had prevented countless conflicts and helped build a civilization based on cooperation rather than conquest. But now, for the first time since joining the council, Sarah wondered if there were some problems that couldn't be solved with gentle words and patient diplomacy. The thought troubled her more than she cared to admit. That evening, as she walked back to her quarters, Sarah noticed that the usual friendly greetings from other station residents seemed a bit more subdued. Word of the day's unsuccessful negotiations had spread quickly through the station's gossip networks. Everyone was hoping that tomorrow would bring better results. Sarah entered her quarters and sat down at her desk to prepare her daily report for Earth. As she typed, she chose her words carefully. The report would be transmitted through standard council communication channels, which meant it could potentially be intercepted and read by other species. Negotiations proceeding as expected, she wrote. Both parties remain committed to finding a diplomatic solution. We'll continue mediation efforts tomorrow. But after sending the official report, Sarah activated a secondary communication system built into her desk. This system used quantum encryption methods that were supposedly impossible to break. She typed a much shorter message. Situation deteriorating. May need contingency protocols. The message was transmitted instantly to Earth through a network of relay stations that existed outside the normal council communication grid. Most council members didn't even know this network existed. As Sarah prepared for bed, she looked out the window of her quarters at the stars beyond. Somewhere out, their Zephyrian and Korthak fleets were probably already moving into position. Tomorrow's negotiations might be the last chance to prevent a war that could spread across the galaxy. She had always believed that patient diplomacy could solve any problem. But as she drifted off to sleep, Sarah found herself wondering if the galaxy was about to learn some very unpleasant truths about what happened when peaceful solutions failed. The second day of negotiations began with an air of tension that everyone on Council Station Alpha could feel. Sarah arrived at the main chamber 30 minutes early, hoping to catch either Admiral Kessevar or General Thurok for a private conversation before the formal session began. She had spent most of the night thinking about different approaches that might break through their stubborn positions. Admiral Kessevar entered the chamber precisely on time, his silver hair perfectly groomed and, his blue uniform immaculate. He nodded politely to Sarah but didn't approach her for conversation. Instead, he activated a personal communication device and began speaking quietly in the rapid, musical language of his people. General Thurok arrived a few minutes later, his heavy footsteps echoing through the chamber. Unlike the Zephyrian Admiral's precise appearance, the Korthak General looked like he had slept in his armor. His bone ridges bore fresh scratches, which Sarah knew was a sign of stress among his people. "Good morning, General," Sarah said, approaching him with her usual calm smile. "I hope you were able to rest well." Thurok looked down at her with his deep-set eyes. "Rest is for those who have settled their obligations, Ambassador. My people expect results, not comfort. The words weren't hostile, but there was an undertone that made Sarah pause. In all her years of diplomatic work, she had learned to read the subtle signals that people gave off when they were preparing for violence. General Thurok was showing several of those signs. "I understand the pressure you're under," Sarah replied, carefully. "Perhaps we could explore some new options today. I've been thinking about creative approaches that might address both sides' core concerns." "We shall see," Thurok rumbled. "But know this, Ambassador Chen. The Korthak Empire has been patient for 50 years while the Council talks and talks. That patience is not unlimited." As other Council members began filing into the chamber, Sarah noticed that several species had sent additional representatives. News of yesterday's unsuccessful negotiations had clearly spread, and everyone wanted to see how this situation would develop. Zixtal, the insect-like being she had spoken with yesterday, approached her with obvious concern. "Ambassador, many of us are worried about this dispute. It has been decades since the Council faced such a difficult situation." "I appreciate everyone's concern," Sarah replied. "These negotiations can be challenging, but we've handled difficult cases before." "Yes, but never with both sides seeming so." Zixtal's antennae twitched as he searched for the right word. "So ready for violence." Sarah kept her expression neutral, but internally she noted that even other Council members were picking up on the aggressive signals from both the Zephyrians and Korthak. This was not a good sign. The formal session began with Sarah reviewing the points of disagreement that had emerged yesterday. She had prepared a presentation showing how the disputed star systems could be developed in ways that benefited both civilizations. "The key to resolving this conflict," she explained, "lies in recognizing that both cultures bring valuable strengths to these systems. The Zephyrian Republic has advanced mining technology that could extract resources more efficiently than traditional methods. The Korthak Empire has extensive experience with long-term territorial administration." She activated the holographic display to show her proposed solution. "I suggest a joint development agreement. The Zephyrians would handle resource extraction in exchange for 60% of the profits. The Korthak would provide security and administration services in exchange for 40% of the profits, plus guaranteed access routes for their traditional migration paths." Admiral Kesvar studied the proposal for several minutes before responding. "Ambassador Chen, your suggestion shows considerable thought. However, it fails to address the fundamental issue. These systems belong to the Zephyrian Republic by right of discovery. We cannot accept a partnership that treats illegal claims as legitimate." General Thurok's bone ridges darkened, which Sarah knew was a sign of rising anger. "Illegal claims? The Korthak Empire's rights to these systems are older than your entire civilization, Admiral. We will not be reduced to hired security guards in our own territory." "Your own territory?" Admiral Kesavar's voice rose slightly. "You have no documents, no legal foundations for that claim. Only ancient songs and migration routes that could have gone anywhere. Our songs remember the names of every star in those systems." Thurok shot back. "They describe planetary features that your people only discovered when they arrived. How do you explain that?" Sarah could see the discussion spiraling toward open hostility. She raised her hand for attention. "Gentlemen, let's step back from historical claims for a moment. Both of your civilizations have grown beyond the point where these 7 systems are critical to your survival. Perhaps we should focus on what you really need, rather than what you think you deserve." The words were diplomatically phrased, but Sarah had deliberately chosen them to challenge both sides. Sometimes a mediator needed to push negotiating parties out of their comfort zones to achieve real progress. Admiral Kesavar turned to look at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "Ambassador, are you suggesting that the Zephyrian Republic should simply ignore our legitimate territorial rights because we have grown prosperous enough to survive without these resources?" "I'm suggesting that flexibility in negotiations often leads to better outcomes for everyone involved," Sarah replied evenly. General Thurok made a sound that might have been laughter, but it came out as more of a growl. "Flexibility. Is that what humans call it when the strong are asked to accommodate the demands of the weak?" Something in his tone made Sarah pause. In all her years of diplomatic work, She had never heard a council member speak in quite that way about strength and weakness. The Galactic Council had been built on the principle that cooperation was more effective than dominance. "General," she said carefully, "strength takes many forms. The ability to find peaceful solutions to complex problems requires a different kind of strength than military force." "Does it?" Thurok asked. "Tell me, Ambassador, what happens when one side in a negotiation has no interest in peaceful solutions? What does your human diplomacy accomplish then?" The question hung in the air. Like a challenge, Sarah could feel other council members shifting uncomfortably in their seats. This kind of direct confrontation was rare in the chamber. "In my experience," Sarah replied, "there are always peaceful solutions if both sides are willing to look for them." Admiral Kesevar leaned forward in his seat. "And if they're not willing? What then?" Sarah maintained her calm expression, but she was beginning to feel like this conversation was moving in a dangerous direction. "The Council has been successful for over 3 centuries because we've built a system where violence is unnecessary." "Unnecessary? For whom?" General Thurok asked. Easy words from a species that has never had to fight for anything important. The comment hit Sarah like a physical blow. She had heard variations of this sentiment before, usually from species that were frustrated with the slow pace of diplomatic processes, but it had never been stated so bluntly in formal negotiations. "General," she said, keeping her voice steady, "Earth has contributed significantly to galactic peace. Human mediators have prevented dozens of conflicts over the past 50 years. "Yes," Thurok replied. "You've prevented conflicts. But tell me, Ambassador, what has Earth ever truly fought for? What has your species ever been willing to sacrifice? Everything to protect?" Sarah found herself thinking of her conversation with Director Harrison yesterday. She remembered his words about not letting the Council's peace fall apart on our watch. But she also found herself wondering what other Council members would think if they knew about some of the conversations that took place in secure Earth communication channels. "The Korthak Empire has ancient warrior traditions," she replied diplomatically. "I understand that your people value courage and sacrifice, but surely you can see the benefits of resolving disputes without bloodshed." "Bloodshed?" Admiral Kesevar repeated the word thoughtfully. "An interesting choice of words. Tell me, Ambassador, do you think the lack of bloodshed always indicates a successful resolution?" Sarah looked at him more carefully. Admiral Kesevar had always been polite and professional in their previous interactions. But there was something different about him today. Something that reminded her of predators she had seen in nature documentaries from Earth. "I believe that solutions which avoid loss of life are generally preferable," she said. "Generally preferable," Kesevar repeated. "But not always? Are there situations where you would consider bloodshed acceptable?" The question felt like a trap, but Sarah couldn't identify exactly why. "The Council Charter recognizes the right of self-defense," she replied carefully. "But it also emphasizes that conflicts should be resolved through negotiation whenever possible." General Thurok made that growling sound again. "Self-defense, yes, that's an interesting concept. Tell me, what would humans consider worth defending?" Sarah realized that somehow the conversation had shifted away from the border dispute entirely. Both the Zephyrian admiral and the Korthak general seemed more interested in probing her responses than in discussing their territorial claims. "This is getting off topic," she said firmly. "We're here to discuss the disputed star systems, not to debate theoretical questions about conflict resolution." "Are we?" Admiral Kesevar asked. "I'm beginning to think this entire process is about something much larger than 7 star systems." Around the chamber, other council members were watching the exchange with growing confusion. Several had started whispering among themselves. This was definitely not how diplomatic negotiations normally proceeded. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. Something was happening here that she didn't fully understand. Both negotiating parties seemed to be testing her in ways that had nothing to do with territorial disputes. "Admiral General," she said, "I suggest we take a short recess to refocus our discussions on the specific issues at hand." "Of course," Admiral Kesevar replied smoothly. "But before we break, I have one more question for you, Ambassador. What is it? In your 50 years of galactic diplomacy, has Earth ever encountered a situation where peaceful negotiation was truly impossible? Where one side simply refused to accept any reasonable compromise? Sarah thought carefully before answering. There have been challenging cases, but we've always found solutions eventually. Always, General Thurrock rumbled. How convenient. And what do you think would happen if you encountered a situation where your diplomatic methods simply didn't work? The question seemed innocent enough, but something in his tone made Sarah's instincts scream warnings. She felt like a small animal being circled by much larger predators. I suppose we would have to find new approaches, she replied. New approaches, Admiral Kesevar repeated. How flexible are humans willing to be when their preferred methods fail? Before Sarah could answer, her personal communication device vibrated with an urgent message. She glanced at it and saw a priority alert from Earth. The message was brief. Zephyrian and Korthak fleet movements detected. Advise immediate consultation. Sarah looked up from her device to find both Admiral Kesevar and General Thurrock watching her intently. For just a moment, their polite diplomatic masks seemed to slip, and she saw something underneath that made her blood run cold. I think, she said slowly, that we should indeed take that recess now. As the council members filed out of the chamber, Sarah remained in her seat, staring at the message on her device. For the first time in her diplomatic career, she was beginning to suspect that she was dealing with something far more dangerous than a simple territorial dispute. And for the first time in 50 years, humanity might need to consider options that went far beyond gentle diplomacy. Sarah walked quickly through the corridors of Council Station Alpha, her mind racing as she processed the urgent message from Earth. The recess would only last 30 minutes, but she needed answers before the negotiations resumed. Other council members she passed seemed to sense her urgency and gave her worried looks, but she maintained her usual calm exterior. Her private office felt smaller than usual as she activated the secure communication system. Director Harrison's face appeared on the screen within seconds, but he wasn't alone. Behind him, Sarah could see other figures moving around what looked like a command center. Sarah, we have a serious situation developing, Harrison said without preamble. Our monitoring stations are detecting significant fleet movements from both the Zephyrian Republic and the Korthak Empire. They're not just positioning for a border skirmish. These look like full military mobilizations. How significant? Sarah asked, though she was afraid she already knew the answer. Zephyrian battle groups are moving toward the disputed systems from 3 different directions. The Korthak have mobilized their entire Third Fleet and are bringing in auxiliary forces from their home territories. Based on the ship counts, this could escalate beyond anything the Council has seen in over a century. Sarah felt her stomach drop. Are they planning to fight each other? Or are they coordinating somehow? Harrison paused, and Sarah could see him consulting with someone off-screen. That's what we're trying to figure out. The movement patterns suggest they're preparing for a major confrontation, but the timing is too coordinated to be coincidental. What do you mean? Both fleets began moving approximately 6 hours ago, right around the time yesterday's negotiations ended. Either they're planning to fight each other and coordinated the timing, or Harrison trailed off. Or they're planning something else entirely, Sarah finished. The pieces were starting to come together in her mind, and she didn't like the picture they formed. Sarah, I need you to think carefully about everything that happened in those negotiations. Was there anything unusual about how they were conducting themselves? Sarah thought back to the strange questions both Admiral Kesevar and General Thurrock had asked. They seemed more interested in probing my responses than in actually negotiating. They kept asking about human attitudes toward conflict and what Earth would do if diplomacy failed. Damn, Harrison muttered. Sarah, I think you're being used as a test case. What do you mean? Think about it. The Galactic Council has been peaceful for centuries, largely because humans have been there to mediate disputes. But what if some species are starting to wonder whether that system only works because no one has seriously challenged it? Sarah felt a chill run through her. You think they're testing whether the Council's peaceful approach can handle a real crisis? More than that. I think they're testing whether humans can handle a real crisis. If they can demonstrate that human diplomacy breaks down when faced with genuinely hostile actors, it could undermine the entire council system. But why would they want to do that? Harrison's expression grew grim. Because some species might prefer a galaxy where strength matters more than cooperation, where territorial disputes are settled by whoever has the bigger fleet. Sarah stared at the screen, her mind reeling. Director, there's something else. Both the Admiral and General asked specific questions about what humans would do if peaceful methods failed. It felt like they were trying to get me to reveal something. What kind of something? I don't know. But they seemed to be probing for information about human capabilities or intentions that go beyond our diplomatic role. Harrison was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was carefully controlled. Sarah, I'm going to ask you a direct question, and I need you to think very carefully before you answer. Based on your assessment of the situation, do you believe these negotiations have any chance of succeeding? Sarah considered everything she had observed over the past 2 days. The hostile attitudes, the probing questions, the fleet movements that had begun before the talks even concluded. No, she said finally. I don't think they ever intended these negotiations to succeed. This whole thing feels like a setup. Then we need to implement Protocol 7. Sarah's breath caught. Protocol 7 was something she had been briefed on when she first became ambassador, but she had never expected to use it. It involved withdrawing all human personnel from potential conflict zones and shifting to what the briefing materials had euphemistically called alternative diplomatic approaches. Are you sure? She asked. The fleet movements confirm it. This is going to be a major conflict, and based on the patterns we're seeing, it might spread beyond the disputed systems. We need our people out of harm's way before this gets worse. What about the Council? What about maintaining galactic peace? Harrison's expression softened slightly. Sarah, you've done everything possible to find a peaceful solution. Some problems can't be solved with words, no matter how skilled the diplomat. The Council needs to learn that lesson even if it's painful. And after Protocol 7? That depends on how far this conflict spreads and whether other Council members can contain it. But Sarah, I want you to understand something clearly. Your safety and the safety of other human personnel is our top priority. Everything else is secondary. The call ended, leaving Sarah alone with her thoughts. She had spent 8 years believing that patient diplomacy could solve any problem. The idea that some conflicts might be beyond peaceful resolution felt like a betrayal of everything she had worked for. But as she prepared to return to the negotiations, Sarah found herself thinking about the questions Admiral HFY and General Thurok had asked. They had seemed genuinely curious about what humans would do if pushed beyond their limits, as if they were testing boundaries that they didn't fully understand. The negotiation chamber felt different when Sarah returned. The atmosphere was tenser, and she noticed that several council members had brought additional staff with them. Word of the fleet movements had clearly reached other species. Admiral HFY and General Thurok were already in their seats, engaged in what appeared to be a pleasant conversation about Korthak poetry. But Sarah could see the way they were watching her peripherally, waiting for her reaction to whatever news she had received during the recess. Shall we resume our discussions? Sarah asked, taking her position in the center of the chamber. Of course, Admiral HFY replied. I trust your consultation was productive. Sarah maintained her diplomatic smile, but something in her eyes had changed. Very productive, thank you. I've received some updated information that may affect our negotiations. Oh? General Thurok leaned forward with apparent interest. What kind of information? Both of your governments have begun significant fleet movements toward the disputed systems. This suggests that regardless of what we accomplish here, military action may already be inevitable. Around the chamber, other council members began murmuring among themselves. This was the first official confirmation of what many had suspected. Admiral HFY spread his hands in a gesture of innocence. Routine defensive preparations, Ambassador. Surely you understand that responsible governments must be prepared for all contingencies. Defensive preparations. Sarah repeated. I see, and I suppose the Korthak Empire's mobilization is also purely defensive. General Thurok's bone ridges darkened slightly. The Korthak Empire protects what belongs to it. If others choose to threaten our rightful territories, they must be prepared to face the consequences. Sarah looked around the chamber at the other council members. Many of them looked shocked by the open hostility between the two negotiating parties. This was not how council disputes were supposed to proceed. In that case, Sarah said carefully, I believe it would be appropriate to inform the Council of Earth's position regarding this conflict. Something flickered in both Admiral Kesevar's and General Thurok's eyes. This was clearly the moment they had been waiting for. By all means, the Admiral said, please share Earth's wisdom with us. Sarah took a deep breath. Earth has reviewed the situation and concluded that both the Zephyrian Republic and the Korthak Empire have decided to pursue military solutions rather than diplomatic ones. Under these circumstances, my government has instructed me to withdraw all human personnel from the disputed regions within the next 24 hours. The chamber erupted in surprised voices. Several council members stood up to ask questions, but Sarah continued speaking. Additionally, Earth will be temporarily suspending our mediation services throughout this sector until the current crisis is resolved. We believe it would be inappropriate for human diplomats to remain in areas where their safety cannot be guaranteed. General Thurok leaned back in his seat with what might have been satisfaction. So humans withdraw when faced with real conflict. How predictable. We withdraw our civilians from potential war zones, Sarah corrected. This is standard procedure for any responsible government. Admiral Kesevar tilted his head thoughtfully. And what if this conflict spreads beyond the disputed systems? What if other council members are drawn into the fighting? Will Earth continue to withdraw, or might you consider more active involvement? The question was clearly a probe, and Sarah recognized it as such. But after her conversation with Director Harrison, she felt no obligation to satisfy their curiosity. Earth's response to hypothetical future scenarios will depend on the specific circumstances involved, she replied diplomatically. Hypothetical, Thurok repeated. Yes, I suppose everything is hypothetical until it actually happens. Around the chamber, other council members were having urgent whispered conversations. Several had activated their own communication devices to contact their home governments. The reality that a major war might be about to break out was finally sinking in. Zixtal stood up, his antennae quivering with distress. Ambassador Chen, surely there must be some way to prevent this conflict. The Council has maintained peace for over 3 centuries. We cannot simply allow it to collapse over a border dispute. Sarah looked at him with genuine sympathy. Zixtal, I have spent 2 days trying to find a peaceful solution. Both sides have rejected every compromise I've suggested. At some point, a mediator has to acknowledge that not all parties are negotiating in good faith. But the consequences, Zixtal began. The consequences are precisely what Admiral Kesevar and General Thurok intended from the beginning, Sarah said quietly. This was never about 7-star systems. This was about testing whether the Council's peaceful approach could survive. When faced with actors who prefer force to diplomacy, she turned to address the 2 primary negotiators directly. Congratulations, gentlemen. You've successfully demonstrated that the Council's peace depends on voluntary cooperation. When that cooperation ends, so does the peace. Admiral Kesevar smiled, but it wasn't a pleasant expression. You sound disappointed, Ambassador. Did you really believe that civilized behavior was anything more than a choice? I believed that rational beings would choose cooperation over destruction, Sarah replied. I was apparently mistaken. Not mistaken, General Thurok rumbled. Simply naive. The galaxy is not a safe place, Ambassador. It never has been. Your people have been fortunate to live under the protection of others for 50 years, but protection is not the same thing as safety. Sarah felt something cold settle in her stomach. The protection of others? Did you think the Council's peace was maintained by good intentions and diplomatic words? Admiral Kesevar asked. How charmingly innocent. The implication hit Sarah, like a physical blow. For 50 years, humans had believed they were contributing to galactic peace through their diplomatic skills. But if what the Admiral was suggesting was true, they had actually been protected by the military strength of other species who chose not to use it. "I see," Sarah said quietly. "And now you're planning to test what happens when that protection is withdrawn." "Now we're planning to find out what the galaxy looks like when strength matters more than clever words," Thurok replied. Sarah looked around the chamber one last time. The other council members looked terrified, confused, and angry. They had believed in the system just as much as she had, and now they were watching it collapse in real time. "In that case," she said, "I declare these negotiations concluded. Earth wishes both the Zephyrian Republic and the Korthak Empire the best of luck in their upcoming conflict." As she walked out of the chamber, Sarah could hear the voices of other council members rising in panic behind her. But her mind was already focused on the next phase of Protocol 7 and the difficult conversations she would need to have with Director Harrison. Because if Admiral Kesevar and General Thurok thought they were about to learn what humans were really capable of, they were about to get a much more comprehensive education than they had bargained for. 18 hours after Sarah had declared the negotiations concluded, the galaxy watched in horror as the largest space battle in over 2 centuries began to unfold. The Zephyrian and Korthak fleets had converged on the disputed star systems exactly as their monitoring stations had predicted. What nobody had expected was the sheer scale and brutality of the conflict that followed. Sarah stood in the observation deck of Council Station Alpha, watching the real-time tactical displays that showed the battle raging 3 systems away. Red and blue dots representing hundreds of ships moved across the holographic star chart, leaving trails of debris in their wake. The casualty reports were already in the thousands and climbing rapidly. Around her, council members from dozens of species watched in stunned silence. Many had lived their entire lives without witnessing anything more violent than heated debates in the diplomatic chambers. The reality of modern space warfare was more devastating than most of them had imagined. "How did it come to this?" whispered Yilvara, a delicate aquatic being whose species had joined the council over a century ago. Her translation unit converted, her ultrasonic speech into audible words but couldn't hide the distress in her voice. Sarah didn't answer immediately. She was too busy processing what she was seeing on the tactical displays. The battle patterns were wrong. Both fleets were fighting with a level of coordination and tactical sophistication that didn't match the chaotic border dispute they were supposedly engaged in. "Ambassador Chen," called out Council President Mordak, a massive creature with 6 arms and crystalline skin. "Your government's decision to withdraw human personnel was prescient. How did Earth know this would escalate so quickly?" Sarah turned to face him, her expression carefully neutral. "Earth has been monitoring the situation closely. The fleet movements yesterday made it clear that both sides were committed to military action regardless of diplomatic progress. But the scale of this," Mordak gestured toward the tactical display, "this isn't a border skirmish, this is total warfare." Sarah nodded grimly. "Yes, it is." What she didn't tell the council president was that Earth's monitoring stations were detecting patterns in the battle that suggested something far more sophisticated than a simple territorial dispute. The Zephyrian and Korthak fleets were fighting each other with devastating effectiveness, but they were also doing something else. They were methodically destroying every piece of council monitoring equipment and communication relay in the disputed systems. Her personal communication device vibrated with an encrypted message from Earth. Sarah excused herself and found a private alcove where she could read it without being observed. "All human personnel successfully evacuated from Sectors 7 through 12. Phase 2 of Protocol 7 authorized. Admiral Torres en route to your location." Sarah's hands trembled slightly as she processed the message. Admiral Marcus Torres was not a diplomat. He was the commanding officer of Earth's Deep Space Fleet, a force that most council members didn't even know existed. If Torres was coming to Council Station Alpha, it meant that Earth was preparing to abandon 50 years of peaceful diplomacy in favor of something much more direct. She made her way back to her private office, her mind racing with the implications. As she passed through the corridors, she noticed that many sections of the station seemed strangely quiet. It took her a moment to realize why. The human support staff, technical advisors, and cultural liaisons who had been stationed throughout the galaxy were all gone. Every single human civilian had been quietly evacuated over the past 18 hours. In her office, Sarah activated the secure communication system and established contact with Earth. Director Harrison appeared on the screen, but like yesterday, he wasn't alone. The background showed what was clearly a military command center with uniformed officers moving purposefully between workstations. "Sarah, how are you holding up?" Harrison asked. "I'm fine, Director, but I'm starting to understand the scope of what we're dealing with. This isn't just a border war, is it?" Harrison's expression was grim. "No, it's not. Our analysis suggests that the Zephyrian Republic and Korthak Empire have been planning this for months, possibly years. The border dispute was just an excuse to test the Council's response to large-scale violence. And my role in the negotiations? You were there to provide legitimacy to the process and to give them information about human capabilities and limitations. They wanted to see how we would react when our diplomatic methods failed." Sarah felt a surge of anger at being manipulated, but she pushed it down. "What happens now?" "That depends on how far they're willing to push this. If they're content to fight each other and destroy those 7 systems, we'll let them. But if they move against other council members or threaten civilian populations, we'll intervene?" Harrison nodded. "Protocol 7 includes provisions for active defense of council space. We've been hoping never to use those provisions, but circumstances may force our hand." Before Sarah could respond, alarms began sounding throughout Council Station Alpha. Emergency broadcasts echoed through the corridors, announcing that the battle had expanded beyond the disputed systems. Zephyrian forces were moving toward civilian shipping lanes, while Korthak raiders had begun attacking supply convoys bound for Council worlds. "They're escalating," Sarah said, watching the updated tactical displays on her office wall. "Yes, they are. Sarah, I need you to prepare for Admiral Torres's arrival. He'll be taking over primary responsibility for Earth's response to this crisis." "What about the Council? What about maintaining diplomatic relations?" Harrison's expression softened slightly. "Sarah, you've done everything possible to preserve the peace. But there comes a point where diplomacy becomes enabling rather than solving. The Zephyrians and Korthak have made their choice. Now Earth has to make ours." The communication ended, leaving Sarah alone with the sound of alarms and the knowledge that 50 years of human diplomatic effort was about to be replaced by something entirely different. 3 hours later, Sarah was back on the observation deck when she witnessed something that would be remembered throughout galactic history. The tactical displays showed Zephyrian and Korthak forces converging on a civilian space station in the Proxima Relay System. The station housed over 1 million beings from various council species and served as a major trade hub for the sector. As the alien fleets closed in on the defenseless station, Sarah watched in growing horror. The station's population was attempting to evacuate, but there wasn't enough time. Thousands of civilian ships were streaming away from the station, but the attacking fleets would reach them before they could jump to safety. Around her, Council members were shouting into their communication devices, desperately trying to organize some kind of rescue effort. But the nearest Council military assets were hours away, and most Council species had limited combat capabilities anyway. "They're targeting civilians," Zixtal said, his voice filled with disbelief. "This violates every principle the Council was founded on." Sarah watched the tactical display with cold fury building in her chest. Admiral Kesivar and General Thurok had pushed beyond territorial disputes into wholesale slaughter. This was exactly the kind of escalation that Protocol 7 was designed to address. Then something appeared on the tactical display that made everyone in the observation deck fall silent. Ships were emerging from hyperspace near the endangered civilian station. But they weren't Council vessels. The configuration was unlike anything most species had seen before. Sleek, angular designs that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. They moved with a precision and coordination that suggested advanced, artificial intelligence assistance. "What are those?" President Mordak asked, his crystalline skin darkening with confusion. Sarah recognized the ship designs from classified briefings she had received years earlier. Those are Earth vessels. Impossible, said Yilvara. Earth doesn't have military ships. Your people are diplomats and peacekeepers. Sarah didn't correct her. Instead, she watched as the mysterious human vessels positioned themselves between the attacking alien fleets and the civilian station. The lead ship opened a communication channel that broadcast to the entire sector. This is Admiral Marcus Torres of the Earth Deep Space Fleet. All vessels are ordered to cease hostile actions against civilian targets immediately. Any ship that fires on defenseless populations will be considered an enemy of humanity. The voice was calm and professional, but there was something underneath it that made Sarah shiver. Admiral Torres sounded like someone who was very good at violence and completely comfortable with the idea of using it. Admiral Kesevar's reply came moments later. Admiral Torres, Earth has no authority in this sector. Your diplomatic immunity does not extend to military intervention in sovereign conflicts. Admiral Kesevar, Torres replied, Earth is hereby withdrawing from all diplomatic protocols regarding this conflict. We are invoking our right to defend innocent populations from unlawful aggression. You have 30 seconds to alter course away from civilian targets. And if we refuse, General Thurok's voice joined the communication. What will your peaceful little species do to stop us? Admiral Torres's response was delivered in the same calm tone, but the words sent chills through everyone listening. General, you're about to learn why Earth spent 50 years being diplomatic. It was never because we couldn't do anything else. The 30 seconds expired. The Zephyrian and Korthak fleets continued their approach toward the civilian station. And then, without any visible weapons fire or dramatic explosions, every single attacking ship simply stopped working. Sarah watched in amazement as hundreds of warships drifted helplessly in space, their engines dead, their weapons offline, their communication systems silent. It had happened simultaneously across both fleets, as if someone had thrown a switch that turned off every piece of technology on their ships. How? President Mordak whispered. Admiral Torres's voice filled the silence. For 50 years, Earth has been providing technical assistance, communication systems, and infrastructure support to Council species. Did you really think we would do that without building in certain safeguards? The implications hit Sarah like a physical blow. Every piece of technology that Earth had helped develop, every communication network they had assisted with, every computer system they had provided support for, all of it had hidden capabilities that could be activated remotely. You're saying humans have had backdoor access to our technology for 50 years? Yilvara asked, her voice rising with panic. We're saying, Admiral Torres replied, that Earth takes the safety of innocent populations very seriously, and we've been preparing for this conversation for a very long time. Around the observation deck, Council members began frantically activating their communication devices, trying to contact their home governments. But many of the devices weren't responding properly. Systems that had worked perfectly minutes earlier were now displaying error messages or operating with reduced functionality. Sarah realized that she was witnessing the end of one galactic era and the beginning of another. For 50 years, Earth had played the role of gentle mediators and helpful advisors, but underneath that peaceful exterior, humanity had been building the infrastructure for a completely different kind of relationship with the galaxy. The question now was what Earth intended to do with the power they had just revealed. And based on Admiral Torres's tone, Sarah suspected that the Zephyrian Republic and Korthak Empire were about to find out the hard way. Admiral Marcus Torres arrived at Council Station Alpha 12 hours after his fleet had disabled the attacking Zephyrian and Korthak forces. Sarah watched his shuttle dock through her office window, noting the way the sleek black vessel seemed to absorb the station's lights rather than reflect them. Even the Admiral's transportation looked more like a weapon than a diplomatic vehicle. She made her way to the main docking bay, where a crowd of Council members had gathered to witness Earth's military commander in person. Most had never seen a human who wasn't a diplomat or civilian advisor. The contrast was striking when Admiral Torres stepped off his shuttle. Where Sarah and other human diplomats were soft-spoken and non-threatening, Admiral Torres looked like he had been carved from stone. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with gray hair and eyes that seemed to catalog every potential threat in the room. His uniform was simple black with minimal decoration, but something about the way he wore it suggested deadly competence. "Council, members," he said, his voice carrying easily through the docking bay. "I am Admiral Marcus Torres of Earth's Deep Space Fleet. I apologize for the dramatic nature of my introduction to your station." President Mordak stepped forward, his crystalline skin shifting through nervous colors. "Admiral Torres, Earth's actions have raised many questions among the council members. We hope you can provide some explanations." "Of course," Torres replied. "Perhaps we could continue this discussion in a more formal setting." Within an hour, the main council chamber was packed with representatives from every member species. Many had traveled from their home world specifically to attend this emergency session. The atmosphere was tense with a mixture of fear, curiosity, and barely controlled anger. Admiral Torres took the center position that Sarah had occupied during her failed negotiations. But where she had projected peaceful diplomacy, he radiated controlled lethality. Even standing still, he looked dangerous. "Council members," he began, "I want to address the concerns that have been raised about Earth's actions and capabilities. For 50 years, humanity has served as mediators and advisors to this body. During that time, we have prevented numerous conflicts and contributed to the longest period of galactic peace in recorded history." "By lying to us," interrupted Senator Krickstahl of the Hegemony Coalition, "your people pretended to be peaceful, while secretly building military capabilities and compromising our technology." Torres turned to look at the senator with an expression that was perfectly polite, but somehow terrifying. "Senator, Earth never lied about anything. We simply didn't volunteer information that wasn't requested. Information about backdoors in our computer systems? Information about defensive measures built into collaborative technology projects," Torres corrected. "Every system we helped develop included safeguards against misuse. We considered this prudent given the volatile nature of galactic politics." President Mordak leaned forward in his seat. "Admiral, you disabled entire fleets with what appeared to be the flip of a switch. That level of technological penetration suggests planning that goes far beyond defensive measures." Torres nodded calmly. "You're absolutely right, President Mordak. Earth has been planning for various contingencies since the day we joined the Council." The admission sent shocked murmurs through the chamber. Sarah, watching from the human section, could see the fear in many council members' faces as they realized the implications. "What kind of contingencies?" asked Zixtal, his antennae twitching with anxiety. "The contingency we just witnessed," Torres replied. "What happens when council members decide that military force is preferable to diplomatic negotiation? What happens when aggressive species begin targeting civilian populations? What happens when the peace that has protected this galaxy for centuries begins to break down?" Admiral Kesvar's voice cut through the chamber. He had been brought to the station under guard after his fleet was disabled, but as a council member, he retained the right to participate in formal sessions. "So Earth appointed itself as the galaxy's hidden guardian? How very noble of you." Torres looked at him with an expression that might have been amusement if it hadn't been so cold. "Admiral Kesvar, Earth didn't appoint itself as anything. We simply recognized a fundamental truth that the rest of the galaxy seemed to ignore." "What truth?" "That peace is not a natural state. It's a choice that must be maintained by those with the capability and will to enforce it." General Thurrock, also present under guard, made his growling sound. "And you believe humans have that capability?" "General," Torres replied, "we just demonstrated that capability. Your fleets are drifting helplessly in space because we chose to disable them rather than destroy them. That was mercy, not weakness." The words hung in the air like a threat. Around the chamber, council members began to understand that they were looking at a completely different side of humanity than they had known for 50 years. Senator Krickstahl stood up angrily. "This is intolerable. Earth has violated the sovereignty of every council member. You've compromised our technology, infiltrated our systems, and now you're threatening us with military force." Torres turned to face him directly. "Senator, let me be very clear about Earth's position. For 50 years, We have worked within the Council's diplomatic framework because we believed in the value of peaceful cooperation. We still believe in that value. But, President Mordak prompted, but we also recognize that not all species share that belief. Admiral Kesevar and General Thurok have demonstrated that some members of this council view peace as weakness and diplomacy as an opportunity for exploitation. Torres activated a holographic display that showed the battle damage from the recent conflict. Destroyed ships, refugee populations, civilian casualties. This is what happens when the strong decide to prey on the weak. Earth will not permit this to become the new normal for galactic civilization. Yelvara's voice was small and frightened. What does that mean for the rest of us, for species that have no desire for conflict? Torres's expression softened slightly when he looked at her. It means that Earth will continue to protect peaceful species from aggressive ones. It means that the choice between cooperation and conquest will continue to be available. But it also means that those who choose conquest will face consequences they may not be prepared for. Consequences like having our fleets disabled? Admiral, Kesevar asked. That was a warning shot, Torres replied calmly. Earth's defensive capabilities extend far beyond what you witnessed yesterday. The implied threat was clear, and Sarah could see its impact on the assembled council members. For 50 years, they had grown comfortable with the idea that humans were gentle creatures who posed no threat to anyone. Now they were learning that humanity's gentleness had been a choice, not a limitation. President Mordak cleared his throat nervously. Admiral Torres, what are Earth's intentions going forward? How should the Council proceed in light of these revelations? Torres was quiet for a long moment, as if choosing his words carefully. Earth proposes a new framework for galactic governance. The Council will continue to operate as it always has, with diplomatic negotiation as the primary method for resolving disputes. Earth will continue to provide mediation services and technical assistance. And the difference? The difference is that aggressive actions against civilian populations or attempts to resolve disputes through military force will be met with immediate intervention by Earth's fleet. We're not interested in conquering anyone or imposing our will on sovereign governments, but we are committed to maintaining the peace that has allowed galactic civilization to flourish. General Thurok leaned back in his seat with what might have been grudging respect. So Earth reveals itself as the galaxy's enforcer. At least you're being honest about it now. We're being honest because the situation has changed, Torres replied. For 50 years, the threat of military action between council members was theoretical. Yesterday, you and Admiral Kesevar made it real. That requires a real response. Sarah found herself thinking about her conversation with Director Harrison days earlier. He had talked about not letting the council's peace fall apart on our watch. Now she understood what that really meant. Earth hadn't just been participating in galactic civilization, they had been protecting it. Zixtal raised one of his 4 hands hesitantly. Admiral, many of us are concerned about the technological infiltration issue. How can we trust our own systems if Earth has hidden access to them? Torres nodded as if he had expected the question. All council members will receive full technical documentation for every system Earth has assisted with over the past 50 years. You'll have complete information about defensive measures and remote access capabilities. You're free to modify or replace any technology you're uncomfortable with. And, if we do, then you'll no longer benefit from Earth's protective systems, which means you'll be responsible for defending yourselves against species like the Zephyrians and Korthak, who prefer military solutions to diplomatic ones. The choice was clear, and Sarah could see council members processing the implications. They could maintain their technological partnership with Earth and benefit from humanity's protection, or they could assert their independence and face the consequences of a galaxy where might made right. Admiral Kesevar spoke up from his position under guard. And what about the Zephyrian Republic and Korthak Empire? What are your intentions regarding our governments? Torres looked at him with an expression that was perfectly pleasant and absolutely terrifying. That depends entirely on your future behavior, Admiral. Earth has no interest in occupying your territories or dictating your internal policies. but any future attempts to resolve disputes through military action will be met with immediate intervention. Our fleets will be returned to you in full working order once you've signed new agreements acknowledging Earth's peacekeeping authority. Your crews are safe and well treated, but they'll remain as our guests until certain guarantees are provided. The message was clear. Earth was offering the galaxy a choice: accept humanity's protection and continue enjoying the benefits of peaceful cooperation, or face the consequences of a universe where military strength determined political outcomes. Sarah watched the faces of the council members as they processed this new reality. Some looked frightened, others angry, and a few seemed almost relieved. But all of them understood that the galaxy had fundamentally changed in the past few days. As the session continued, Sarah found herself thinking about the plant on her office desk. Earth was still a beautiful, peaceful world populated by people who preferred cooperation to conflict. But underneath that gentle surface lay something much more formidable. Humanity had spent 50 years learning about their galactic neighbors, understanding their technologies, and preparing for the day when the choice would be between protecting the peace or watching it collapse. The day had finally arrived, and Earth had made its choice. The rest of the galaxy would now have to decide whether they could live with the consequences. Admiral Torres concluded his address with words that would be remembered throughout galactic history. Peace is not the absence of conflict. It's the presence of justice backed by sufficient force to maintain it. Earth is prepared to provide that force for as long as necessary. The choice of whether it will be necessary belongs to you. As the council members filed out of the chamber to contact their governments, Sarah realized that humanity's 50-year experiment in gentle diplomacy was over. In its place was something new, a galaxy where peace was guaranteed not by good intentions, but by the knowledge that those who broke it would face the full weight of human military power. The question now was whether the other species would choose to accept Earth's protection, or whether they would test the limits of humanity's patience. Based on Admiral Torres's demeanor, Sarah suspected that such tests would not end well for those who attempted them. Earth had been pretending to be gentle for 50 years. Now the galaxy would learn what humanity looked like when it stopped pretending.